Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 85 of Masechta Yoma. Daf 85 is kind of interesting. We kind of pick up in the middle of the discussion that we ended with yesterday, which is the opinion of Shmuel that when it comes to Misa, when it comes to Safek Nefashos, we do not go based on the majority. We're going to continue with that. We will discuss situations where, unfortunately, a house or a building falls down and there's people there, which unfortunately is shtickle current events right now. And Pikuach nefesh dochech shabbos, what the source for Pikuach nefesh dochech shabbos, and then we get to a new Mishnah on Pehei Amud Beis, which is interesting, discusses Teshuva shtickle, and sort of it's a sort of a basis for the Gemaras, of course, that we're going to get into that discuss Teshuva. So very interesting things over there. Some kind of famous things that you may be familiar with from other places. Let's get started with on Pedal Amud Beis, 3 lines to the bottom. Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Did Shmuel really say this? Well, what did Shmuel say in the first place? Lo achu b'pikuach nefesh achar harov. So Shmuel says that when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, when it comes to saving somebody's life, so we don't follow the majority. What does this mean that we don't follow the majority? It means that even though, in general, we might say, well, if the majority, if you have 9 non-Yidden and 1 Yid, so I might think, well, if the majority is non-Yidden, so then if a building falls on one person, so I should assume that it's a non-Yid and I should not be able to be Machal Shabbos to save the fellow. However, says Shmuel that when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, we do not follow the rov, and even in a situation where the majority is non-Yidden, we would still save the person even on Shabbos, because when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, we don't go after the majority, and therefore you would save the fellow. But we learn in the Mishnah, Matzu batinok mushlach. If you find a random baby, Im rov kusim kusif, im rov yisrael yisrael, mechza yisrael. So if the place where the baby is found is a majority a kusi area, which we at least have to assume that they may not be Jewish. So if it's a rov majority kusi area, so we assume that the baby is a kusi. If it's a majority Yiddish area, so we assume that the baby is a Yid. And if it's a 50-50 kind of split, so then we treat the baby as a Yid. And says Rav, says Rav, that's specifically to sustain the baby. Okay, fine, to be able to give the baby food and stuff. Now I'm not exactly sure, honestly, what exactly the nafkamin is to sustain the kid. What does that mean? That we have a chiyuv to keep him alive, as opposed to if he was a kusi, then maybe not necessarily, or maybe it means that no, we have a chiyuv to keep this baby alive, but depending on if it's considered a kusi or a yid, would we feed kosher food or non-kosher food? But regarding to sustain this baby, so if the majority of the people in the place are kusim, we treat the baby as a kusi. If the majority yidden, so we treat the baby as a yid. Low. But when it comes to yichus, so keilu, let's say the baby was a girl baby, and a Kohen wants to marry this girl baby, hopefully once she's a little bit older, so a Kohen is not allowed to marry a convert. Now, if it's a kusi, then we might have to convert potentially to be a yid, in which case, so then that would be a problem in terms of a Kohen being able to marry this, this baby that was found, of course, later on. So now, even in the situation where the majority of the people are Jews, so still, we would not have we would not want a Kohen to marry this baby, because there still is nonetheless a chance that the baby is not a Jew. And as Rashi points out, there's a concept of Maila Asu B'Yuchsin, and when it comes to the integrity of the lineage, we are sort of particularly strict, and therefore even though we say that if the majority of the people are Yidden, we would treat the baby as a Yid, that is regard to sustaining the baby, but with regard to Yichus, to the lineage of the Kohanim, we would not take a chance. Shmuel Amar says, Shmuel, Nefakeach olav v'sagal, and Shmuel says that the nafkamina is, would we save this this child from a fallen building, right? Like if a building falls down and it's Shabbos, we'd be Michal Shabbos to save this person. So we see that this Mishnah seems to be going based on the majority. If it's a majority Kusim, Kusi. If it's a majority Yidden, Yid. 50-50 treated as a Yid. So we see that we're basically just Pasha going after the majority. And Shmuel says that it's talking about the Fakech Olav Sagal. To be Michal Shabbos or not, in order to save this baby. So what do we see? So we see that Pashat by Pikuach Nefesh, we do go after the majority. Haha. Gevaldige kasha. So the Gemara says not so gevaldige. Ki idmar de Shmuel areisha idmar. Now when Shmuel says the Fakech Olav Sagal, that's specifically talking about the first part of the Mishnah that says, Imrov Kusim Kusi, that if the majority of the people in that neighborhood are Kusim, so we treat the baby as a Kusi. However, says Shmuel, Amar Shmuel le'inim Pikuach Nefesh, but when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, ain't okay. We would not treat the baby as a Kusi. Imrov Kusim, period. So, but with regard to Pikuach Nefesh, that's not the case. Rather, even if the majority of the people are Kusim in this area, you would nonetheless save the baby from the Mapolis. Okay. Imrov Kusim Kusi l'mayuchsa. Well, then, one second. So, according to Shmuel, who says that even if the place is majority Kusi, we would still save the baby from a Mapoles. Well then, what's the situation, right? Meaning the Mishnah says that if the majority of the place is Kusim, so we treat the baby as a Kusi. In what sense? Clearly it's not regard to Pikuach Nefesh, because by Pikuach Nefesh we're discarding the rov, the majority. So then, what's the situation where the majority, the rov, becomes relevant? So I'm to feed the baby nevelis, right? It's like I was saying a few minutes ago, that if we're going to sustain this baby, we're going to support this baby, because the baby is just a baby and needs food from people to give it food. So if the majority of the people in this place are kusim, so then you can feed the baby nevelis. You don't have to buy the kosher food. But if it's a majority Yisrael, then you would feed kosher food. And when it says that if the majority of the place is Yidden, so what are we talking about? Lachzir lo avidaso. Okay, if something gets lost, so then we will return it. So I guess we have a chiyuv to return Ashavas Aveda to a Yid. So if the majority of the people are Yidden, so we would do Ashavas Aveda. Sounds nice. Mechza Yisrael ma'ilchsa. What's the halacha? What's the nafkamina if it's 50-50 kusim and Yisraelim? So we say that we treat the fellow like a Yisrael. What's the nafkamina? So listen to this. It's kind of an interesting case. Rish Lakish, says Rish Lakish, the nizakin. With regard to damages, you ready? Hey chidami, what's these damages? Inema denagche Torah didan the Torah dide. Well, if you're saying, well, what if the ox of a Yid were to gore the ox of this baby once, he grows up and becomes an ox owner? Now, so if that's the case, so what happens? So the halacha is that if the ox belonging to a Yid gores the ox belonging to a non-Yid, so halachically speaking, the Yid is not going to be chayev to pay the non-Yid for the damages. So now if we're saying that we treat the non-Yid, in this case, like a Yid, right, that if it's 50-50, right, meaning we found this baby, and it was placed 50% Yidden, 50% non-Yidden, and we're saying that we treat the baby like a Yid, and we want to say what that means is that if the ox of a full-fledged Yid were to gore the ox of this 50-50 baby who grew up and now owns an ox, and we're saying that we treat this baby as a Yid, so that the owner of the goring cow, ox, would have to pay damages to this Suffolk Yid. Why? Naisi Raya Vinishkal. When this Suffolk Yid says, hey, you owe me money because your ox gored my ox, let the goring Yid, let's call them Reuven and Shimon, right? So Reuven, the Yid, and Shimon, the Suffolk Yid. So Reuven's ox gored Shimon, the Suffolk Yid's ox. And now Reuven, the Suffolk Yid says, hey, Reuven, pay me. Because I'm treated like a Yisrael, like a Yid. Reuven, the full-fledged Yid, or the non-Suffolk Yid, will just be like, yo, I ain't paying you. Prove to me that you're a that you're a Vadai Yid. Once you prove to me that you're a Vadai Yid, then I'll pay you, because of course there's a principle of Hamotzi Mechaver Olav Araya. If you're trying to extract payment from somebody, the burden of proof is upon you. And therefore, why would we say that Shimon, the Suffolk Yid, is considered a Yid with regard to if Reuven, the Vadai Yid's ox, gores Shimon, the Suffolk Yid's ox? And we're saying that we're going to treat Shimon, the Suffolk Yid, like a Vadai Yid. With regard to that, Reuven now would have to pay Shimon, the Suffolk Yid, for damages. Why? Reuven will just say, yo bro, prove to me that you're a Vadai Yid, and then I'll pay you. But Memele, we're not going to treat Shimon like a Vadai Yid. So then, Lo Tzricha, Denakhe Torah Dide Le Torah Didon. No, so what it must be talking about is where Shimon, the Suffolk Yid's cow, ox, gores Reuven, the Vadai Yid's ox. So now, in that case, of course, so there is a concept of Nezek and Chatzi Nezek. Nezek is full damages, so if an ox so basically there's a concept of shortam and shormud. Has anybody ever heard of shortam and shormud? A shortam is the first 3 times that an ox gores, right? It's considered that an ox doesn't generally just gore, and the first 3 times that the ox gores, the owner is only responsible to pay 50% of the damages, not 100%. After that, it's considered a shormud, a warned ox, and then the owner has to pay full damages. Now this only applies between 2 Yidden, right? If the ox of one Yid gores the ox of another Yid, so then there's this whole Chatzi Nezek, Nezek Shalim. However, if the ox of a non-Yid were to gore the ox of a Yid, so then there is not this concept of Chatzi Nezek and Nezek Shalim. Rather, the non-Yid who caused the damage always has to pay Nezek Shalim. So, right, the complete damages. So now, in our case, you have Reuven, the Vadai Yid, and you have Shimon, the Suffolk Yid, and Shimon, the Suffolk Yid's ox gores Reuven, the Vadai Yid's ox. So now, Reuven, the Vadai Yid, says to Shimon, the Suffolk Yid, yo, bro, you owe me all this money, right? You are right, I don't know that you're necessarily, certainly a Yid, and therefore, I want you to pay me the entire damages, right? Again, Reuven, the Vadai Yid, whose ox got gored, he says to Shimon, the Suffolk Yid, pay me full damages. To which Reuven, the Suffolk Yid, says, actually, prove to me that I'm not a Yid. Prove to me that I owe you the full damages. And until you could prove to me that I'm not a Yid, I'm only paying you 50% damages like a Yid would pay you. And if you want the other 50%, prove to me that I'm not a Yid. Right? So, that the ox of Shimon the Suffolk Yid gores the ox of Reuven the Vadai Yid. Pal Geyoyevle, and we're saying that we treat Shimon the Suffolk Yid like a Yid, to the extent that Shimon the Suffolk Yid would only pay to Reuven the Vadai Yid 50% damages, because Idach Palga, because with regard to the other 50%, Neimale, let Shimon the Suffolk Yid say to Reuven the Vadai Yid, I see Raya de Lav Yisrael Ana Ushkol. first bring me a proof that I'm really not a Yid like you are arguing, and then I'll pay you the other 50%. But until you bring that documentation, enjoy your 50% and skedaddle. Let's go weiter. Mishnafel olav mapoles v'chule. So we said that if a fellow knew what did the Mishnah say, Lemaise? So the Mishnah said that Mishnafel olav mapoles. So if you have a fellow that a building fell down on him, so safek usham, safek ein usham. So if we're uncertain if there's a fellow trapped under there bichlal or not, we don't know, and we won't know until we move all the rubble. Safek chai, safek meis, or even if there is a fellow dartin, we don't know if he's alive or if he's dead. Safek kusi, safek yisrael, we're not sure if this fellow bichlal is a yid or a non-yid. Mfakhin olav esagal. So nonetheless, we still, remove the rubble in order to locate this person. So Michael Omar, so what exactly, there were all of these distinctions, right? Safek if a person's dartin, safek if a person isn't dartin, safek if it's a yid, safek a non-yid, kilu, all sorts of levels. Michael Omar, what's with the levels? Lo mibaya kamar. It's saying not only this, but even that. What do you mean? Lo mibaya safek usham, safek ein usham. Not only is it talking about a situation where we don't know if there's a fellow dartin or not, the isei chai udem fakhin, that if he's, right, that then you would say that, okay, fine, but so if we know for sure that there's a fellow there, well, maybe only if we know for sure that he's alive would we, kind of move the rubble on Shabbos. Ela afilu safek chai safek meis mefakhin. So it's not only kilu, if we would just have, the first part is that we're not sure if there's a person there or not. Okay, fine. But even if we can ascertain that there's a person, you might think, okay, but we don't know if he's alive or not. So what about in that case? We say, yeah, even if we don't know if he's alive or not, still, even if there's a chance that he's not alive, you're still allowed to remove the rubble. And then, if we're not sure if he's alive or not, so we might think that maybe that only applies if it's a yid. If we know for sure that it's a yid. To which Mishnah says, no, it's not only yid. And even if it's a safek yid, safek non-yid, still, when it comes to the situation of a fallen down building and there's a person trapped there, or even maybe there's a person trapped there, we don't ask questions, if there's a possibility that there's a person trapped there, so then whether there's a person, whether there may be a person, whether there may not be a person, whether it may be alive, not alive, yid, non-yid, just do what you gotta do and try to remedy the situation as efficiently as possible. If, so then we say, the Mishnah continues and says, so now when you can locate this person, so if you find the fellow alive, so you can extract the fellow. If you find the fellow not alive, so then you leave him there until after Shabbos. So the Gemara says, well, obviously if you found him alive, you could remove him. Why shouldn't you be able to? So the Gemara answers, well, even if it's clear that he's not going to last very long, and by dragging him out, maybe you can, extend his life by a few moments, but we're really not talking about anything significant here. Still, even just for those few moments, you can extract the fellow. And if the fellow is gestorben, if he's not alive, so then you leave him there. Hanami pshita. The Gemara says that this is also obvious. If he's not alive, so then a mace is muksa. You can't remove a mace. So l'tzricha Yehuda ben Lakish. So the chiddush here is even according to Yehuda ben Lakish. No, what's Yehuda ben Lakish? The Tanya is we learn in the Brisa. So if there's a fire, we're not allowed to save a person who's already, we can't save a corpse from a fire because the corpse is muksa. The person's already passed away, so you have to leave the body. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish says, no, you are allowed to save a corpse from a fire, and therefore I might think to say, well, if you could save a corpse from a fire according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish, I might think to apply that also to this fallen down building and say that if a person already passed away, you could still extract him. And the Gemara clarifies that when Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish says that you're allowed to extract a corpse from a fire, that's specifically from a fire because a person is bahul al meso, a person is very attached and very emotional around somebody who passed away, and therefore if you don't allow him to remove his dead loved one, so he might end up extinguishing the fire, which is actually a mitzvah, in Isser D'Oraisa on Shabbos, which is where, as opposed to moving a mace, is just D'Rabbanan, it's muksa. Aval hacha. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish says, look, just you can move the mace. Aval hacha. But over here in the fallen down building, if you don't allow him to remove the corpse from the building, what's he going to do? And therefore you leave the corpse. Meaning, when it comes to the fire, if you don't allow the removal of the mace from the fire, so you might end up extinguishing the fire. We don't want that. So we say just, you can extract the corpse. However, when it comes to the building, if we say, hey, don't just leave the corpse, what's he going to end up doing? He's not going to, what's the malach? There's no malach he's going to end up doing instead. And therefore, leave the corpse. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish. Taner Rabbanan, to where do you check for signs of life? Right? Meaning, so you locate the fellow in the rubble, and you want to check if he's alive or not, so you know if you can extract him or not, or if you leave the corpse until after Shabbos. So how do you check to see if he's alive? So archotmo. So you check his nose. You see if there's if he's breathing through his nose. Ve'eshom madlibo. Now those who say take, you check his heart. I don't know if that means in the Ma'aseh to check his pulse or to just. It sounds like pashtus is you see if like his chest is like breathing. If his heart is moving. But maybe taka means pulse. But I think pashtus is talking. I don't know. See if it's like look at his chest. See if he's breathing. So if you check his nose and there's no breathing coming out of his nose, do not assume that you won't find anything in his heart. Because after all, there was a ma'aseh where the fellow was not breathing from his nose, and yet when they checked his heart, he was breathing. So therefore check both. Now the Gemara suggests, let's say that these Tanoim who argue about do you check just the nose or also the heart. So let's say that it's like the following machlokas. The Tanya is we learn in the Brayso Meichan Avlad Notzer. Very interesting shaila. From where is a baby created? Meirosho. So the Tanakama says Meirosho, from his head. Shnemar mimei atagozi, that from my what does it mean? That like from my mother's womb you have, I think, extracted me. V'omer gozi nizreich, and it says extract my crown, which is a reference to the hair, meaning so that the hair kind of is created first, the head is created first. Fine. V'ashlichi. Abishol or mitiburo. Abishol says taka from the belly button, u'mishalech sharoshav elech velech, and then grows out from the belly button. So therefore we want to say that just like there's a machlokas about from where is a baby developed, from the head or from the belly button. So here also we would say, Ki'ilu, do you check for signs of life from the nose, or do you check from the, or does it include even the heart as well? So we'll say that Tanakama is saying just the nose, whereas Abishol would say also the heart. So the Gemara says no, afilu tema Abishol, and you could say that Abishol would also say just the nose, because Adkan lo ka'amar Abishol hasam, because Abishol only says regarding to the creation of the fetus, el inyan nitzira, chomidi mi mitziasa mitzer, that he says that when it comes to the development of a baby, so it starts with the belly button. Avalin pikuach nefesh, but in terms of like signs of life, once a fellow is already born, afilu Abishol modi deikach yusib apeu. Even Abishol would say, look, you just check the nose, because that's where the main source of life is going to be dichsiv. As the pasuk says, kol shenish masruach chaim ba'apav, anything that has signs of life in its nose. So you could say that even Abba Shaul would agree that when it comes to life, you just need to check from the nose. Says Rav Papa that the machlokas is, if you check the heart, do you also have to check the nose? But everyone agrees that if you check the nose and there's no life in the nose, then you don't need to check the heart anymore. As the pasuk says, right, anything that has life in its nose. So we see that life is dependent on the nose, says Rav Papa, and therefore if you check the nose and there's no life, then that's it. Then that's it. There's a shaila, if you check the heart, you also check the nose. But if you check the nose, so then that's it. So a givaldige story with Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It's always gishmak when you see the stories of the Tanoim. The Amoraim we see all the time, right? The Gemara is written by the Amoraim, where they're like the main characters, but the Tanoim, whenever we can get a glimpse into the life of a Tana, it's very gishmak. So here we have a story with Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, givaldig. Mahalchim baderech, they were traveling. V'Levi Asadar, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah mahalchim achrein, and Levi Asadar and Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, were trailing behind. Nishla sheila zo b'fneim, and there was the following shaila: Minayin lefikuach nefesh dochech shabbos. Aha! What is the source for saving a life that it overrides Shabbos? That even if it's Shabbos, do whatever you got to do, whatever malachas you have to do in order to save a life. Then Rabbi Shmuel v'Amar. So Rabbi Shmuel says this is the source. In b'machteres yimotze aganif. There's the halacha of abba b'machteres. I believe we saw abba b'machteres at the beginning of Masechta Pesachim, if I'm not mistaken. Who could tell me what abba b'machteres is? Abba b'machteres is that Ruvain the Ganif. Ruvain the Ganif breaks into Shimon, the victim's house, in the middle of the night. He tunnels into the house. So we say that if Shimon wakes up in the middle of the night and finds Ruvain the Ganif in his house, Shimon can pashit kill Ruvain the Ganif. And therefore, now in this case where Shimon, the victim, cannot know for certain that Reuven the Ganif is planning to kill him, and yet, and murder contaminates the land and causes the divine presence to leave from the Yidden, like murders very shver ezach, and yet nitin la'atzilu b'nafsho, and nonetheless we say that Shimon, the victim, is allowed to kill Reuven the Ganif. Kavachomer lefikuach nefesh shedoches haShabbos. So then certainly saving a life, meaning in this case where Shimon, the victim, or let's say it slightly differently, where Reuven the Ganif may or may not be planning to kill Shimon, the victim. And therefore it's a situation of Safek Pikuach nefesh, and we're saying that in the situation of Safek Pikuach nefesh, Shimon, the victim, can pashit kill Reuven the Ganif, which is pretty extreme. Murder, we just said, contaminates the land and causes the Shechina to leave Israel, and yet Shimon, the victim, is allowed to kill Reuven the Ganif out of this Safek. Well then, Kavachomer lefikuach nefesh dochech haShabbos. Certainly, in terms of to save Pikuach nefesh, it'll be dochech Shabbos. I guess we want to say that, if you could do something so drastic like murder, well then it would make sense to say that Shabbos, while also extremely serious, you would be able to be dochech Shabbos for Pikuach nefesh. Neno Rabbi Akiva gives his version, which is v'Omer v'chiyazid isha re'eu v'gomer. If you have a fellow kill somebody else, and so in this case it's Reuven the Kohen kills Shimon. Me mizvchi tikochenu lamus. So Reuven the Kohen is no longer allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. If Reuven the Kohen kills somebody, he's not allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Now it says, me'im mizbechi v'lo me'al mizbechi. It says we prevent him from going to do the service in the Beis Hamikdash. However, if he's already mid-service and he's on top of the Mizbeach, and then we say, hey, Reuven the Kohen, you killed somebody, we don't say get off of the Mizbeach. We don't say get off of the Mizbeach. We wait for him to finish the avoda. Now it says Rav Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that's only to kill Reuven the Kohen. Meaning, if Reuven the Kohen killed somebody else, and now he's in the Beis HaMikdash, nobody stopped him, and now he's in the Beis HaMikdash, he's doing the avoda, and he's on the Mizbeach. So we say, we're not going to force him off of the Mizbeach in order to take him to court. However, if Reuven the Kohen was not a murderer, rather Reuven the Kohen knows testimony about somebody else who's a murderer, Davka testimony to keep him alive, meaning, right, if Shimon killed Levi, and Reuven the Kohen knows testimony to save Shimon, to show that he's not a murderer, so we say, in that case, we would chop Reuven the Kohen from the Mizbeach in order to save Shimon, the suspected murderer. So now, Umazesha Sofik yesh mamish b'dvarav, Sofik ein mamish b'dvarav. So when it comes to Reuven the Kohen, maybe he really does in fact know testimony to save Shimon, the suspected murderer. Maybe he doesn't. We can't know. We're going to have to take him to court and check. So it's a suffix. And yet, v'avoda dochech Shabbos, and we know that avoda, as we've seen before, is dochech Shabbos, right? You could do avoda in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos, like korbanos and things like that. So if we're saying that the suffix testimony, right, this testimony that may or may not be found to be able to save Shimon, the suspected murderer's life, is dochech the avoda, we say, hey, get off the Mizbeach so that you can come give his testimony, and avoda is dochech Shabbos, well then memele kavachomer Pikuach nefesh dochech Shabbos. So just like Pikuach nefesh is dochech avoda, Pikuach nefesh is memele dochech Shabbos. Then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah v'amar, says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, umamila she'echad mimasayim v'arboim v'shmona evarim sheba'adam dochech Shabbos. Well, bris milah, which is only on one limb of a fellow, and that is dochech Shabbos. Well then, right, we do bris milah on Shabbos. Kavachomer l'chol gufo shedochech Shabbos. Well then, certainly, saving a person's whole body, saving a fellow, is going to be dochech Shabbos as well. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Now we are extending into Tanoim who were not necessarily traveling with Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. We're saying that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, "Es Shabbosai tishmoru," that you shall guard my Shabboses. Make sure that you don't do any malacha on Shabbos. Yachol hakol, is it possible that this is a low plug, that I can't do any malacha ever? I can't even do malacha to save somebody? Tamaloma ach chalek. Right? What does it say? Ach is tasho. Right? What does it say? What does it say? Ach is Shabbosai tishmoru. No, who could tell me what the pasuk says? Somebody, quick, tell me. Wait, seriously, where am I? Pasuk Aleph. And therefore it says ach, which is, as we've seen also in the beginning of, I think at the end of Masechta Eruvin, at the beginning of Masechta Psachim, I think we saw this concept of ach chalek. Anyways, so to divide, meaning say it's not a low plug. It's not that you can never do malach on Shabbos. There are exceptions, right? That you can be dochech Shabbos in order to save a fellow. Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef Omer, ki kodeshi lachem, that it is holy lachem, to you. Hi mesur b'yedchem, v'lo atem mesur b'yada. Shabbos is in your hands, you are not in Shabbos' hands. Meaning, you're not, in the event that it might kill a fellow, you can do malacha. You can take the initiative in that case. If it's safek nefashos. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer says, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, v'shama b'nei es Shabbos. The Yidden should guard Shabbos. Omer Torah, Chavi, you may have heard of this. Chalal olav Shabbos achas, k'dei shishma Shabbosos haibe. Be mechalal one Shabbos, so that in the future this fellow will be able to guard many Shabboses. Right? And therefore it's the interest of the Torah is that v'shama b'nei es Shabbos. We want Yidden to be shomer Shabbos. If this fellow is geshtorben, he's not going to be able to be shomer Shabbos. So we say, you know what? Be mechalal one Shabbos, so that this fellow can then keep many Shabboses. That's what the Torah wants. The Torah wants Yidden keeping Shabbos. And therefore the responsible thing to do is, even if you have to be mechalal Shabbos right now, but that will ensure that this Yid will be able to be shomer many Shabbosos, That would be the better approach. Amr Yehuda, Amr Shmuel, Yavoy Hasam, Havo Amina, Tidia Difamididu. Cheve, listen up. It says of Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, that if I was Darton, I would have said, my source is better than all their sources. V'chai boim v'lo sheyamus boim. The Torah says, v'chai boim. You should live in the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs shouldn't kill you. If a mitzvah is going to kill you, then something's wrong. If being Shomer Shabbos is going to lead to somebody dying because you didn't want to do a malacha on Shabbos and therefore you let a fellow die, you got it all wrong. The whole point is v'chai boim. That the Torah, that the mitzvahs should be so you live by them. If we allow a mitzvah if we allow somebody to die because we're so frum and we're being, so makbid on the mitzvah, so we let another fellow die, then we got it all wrong. Omar Rava, says Rava, l'chulu islu pircha bar midishmua t'leisle pircha. Says Rava, I can ask kashas on all of the opinions of the Tanoim. All of these Tanoim who gave reasons for why Pikuach nefesh is dochech Shabbos, I can ask kashas on all of them. But Shmuel, who says v'chai bohem, no kashas. Teleis lepircha. Do Rabbi Shmuel do makirave? Rabbi Shmuel says from Habab Machteres, right? That we said that in the case where Shimon the victim, or let's say Reuven the Ganef, maybe is planning to kill Shimon the victim or not, and yet we say that even in this case of Safek Pikuach nefesh, Shimon the victim is allowed to go so far as to kill Reuven the Ganef. But maybe it's like Rava. The Omar Rava, and this is, I think, is the pashtus of Ababa Machteres, which is my time with the Machteres. What's pshat? How come Shimon the victim is allowed to kill Reuven the Ganef? Because chazaka. Because we can assume with 100% certainty in order Maimid Atzma Mamono that Shimon the victim is not just going to stand idly by while Reuven the Ganef robs him. And therefore, the high and Reuven the Ganef made the yada, the koila ape. And Reuven the Ganef knows that Shimon might put up a fight. And therefore he says, you know what, I'm not in the mood to fight. And therefore, in advance, Reuven the Ganef says, if Shimon the victim gives me a hard time, I'm just going to pashut kill him. And the Torah says, that if somebody comes to kill you, you can kill him first. And therefore, the reason why Shimon the victim is allowed to kill Reuven the Ganef is not because of Safek Nefashos. There's no Safek here. There's only Vadai. We can assume that Reuven the Ganef is going to kill Shimon the victim if Shimon the victim puts up a fight. And therefore, Shimon the victim knows this, and he says, well, if Reuven the Ganef is going to kill me, I'm going to therefore just kill him first. So it's not a situation of Safek Nefashos. It's the situation of Vada Nefashos, which makes Reuven the Ganef a Rodef, and Shimon the victim is allowed to kill Reuven the Ganef for that reason. And therefore, V'ashkechon Vada Safek Minolan. So therefore, that's no longer a situation of Safek Nefashos, it's Vada Nefashos. So how do I know then that Safek Nefashos would be dochech Shabbos? Because Bab Machteres is not that. To Rabbi Akiva Nami, Domakida Abaye. Rabbi Akiva, who says that, well, when you have Reuven the Kohen, who's on top of the Mizbeach and he's doing the Avodah, and we say that he gets off of the Mizbeach in order to give testimony for Shimon, who's suspected of murder, and we say that maybe Reuven the Kohen has good testimony, maybe not. So it's Safek Pikuach Nefesh, and it's dochech Avodah, and Avodah is dochech Shabbos. But Dilma Kada Abaye, maybe it's taka like Abaye. Domar Abaye, Mesarina le Zuga de Rabbanon, le de Mamish B'dvar. That Abaye says that, so in a situation, the halacha is that when it comes to a fellow who's chayiv misa, right? Reuven killed Shimon, and now Reuven is going to get killed because you're not allowed to kill people. And he's guilty, and he's leaving the courthouse, and Reuven says, wait, I have another argument to say why I'm innocent. So the halacha is you bring him back to the courthouse to see if he's innocent. But what? Do we just keep on dragging him into the courthouse every time he says, I got a new reason? No. Rather, says Abaye, that we have a pair of rabbis who go with Reuven, And when he says that, hey, I got another reason, this pair tests out to see if he really does have a valid argument. And if not, then they just keep him walking to the death spot. So now, therefore we'll say, just like Abaye says, in that case, there are people to test out to see if he's telling the truth. So here also, before we say, Reuven the Kohen, get off the Mizbeach so you can give testimony, we'll first check to make sure that he really does know valid testimony, and the sort of interrogation and the checking of his arguments, of his testimony happens while he's still on the Mizbeach, and therefore he's only going to get down from the Mizbeach if he definitely has good testimony. Again, so in which case, it's no longer Safek Nefashos, maybe he has good testimony, maybe not. No, we check out the testimony and validate it while he's still on the Mizbeach, and therefore it's no longer a situation of Safek, it's a situation of Vadai, because we ascertain that he has valid testimony before he goes down from the Mizbeach. So again, so that's a situation of Vadai Pikuach Nefesh. It's not a situation of Safek Pikuach Nefesh. So where's the situation that in a Safek Pikuach Nefesh that it would be dochech Shabbos? V'chulu ashkechon Vadai Safek Minolan. And we can ask that question by all of them. By all of the remaining Tanoim, we could say, wait, I could argue that this is only in a situation of Vadai, but I wouldn't know about Safek. With the Shmuel, Vadai leis le pircha. But Shmuel's opinion of V'chai bohem, that you should live by the mitzvahs and not die because of them, that there's no questions to ask. V'chai bohem, you should live by the mitzvahs, shouldn't die by the mitzvahs, and that's that. Omer Ravinu v'temer of Nachman bar Yitzchak, that one hot pepper is more significant than an entire basket of bland gourds. You have one sharp pepper, and boom, better, more significant than a whole basket of bland gourds, which is interesting. I guess we're saying we had this whole assortment of Tanoim, of great Tanoim, who gave reasons for Pikuach Nefesh being dochech Shabbos, and comes Shmuel and says, this is it. Very, very interesting. One of the features of being back in Eretz Yisrael is that we have a very lively neighbor, and she's being very, very lively. But, okay, it's good. V'chai bohem, you should live by the mitzvahs. So this is very interesting. We get to a Mishnah, which now we're starting to talk about Teshuva shtickle, which is very interesting. So it says the Mishnah Chatas v'osham v'adeh mechapen, that a korban chatas, chatas v'osham v'adeh mechapen, that a korban chatas and an osham vadai, because there are situations when you can bring in an osham talui, which is a korban osham that you bring because you're not sure if you necessarily did a particular aver, something that you have to bring a korban for. So in that case, you bring an Asham Talui, but we're not talking about an Asham Talui. We're talking about, right, in that case, if you find out that you definitely did the Aver and that you chayev to bring a korban, so then you follow up after the Asham Talui with a different korban. We're not talking about that. We're talking about Asham Vadai, for example, by Me'ilah, you bring a korban Asham Me'ilos, right? So a korban Chatas, a korban Asham Vadai, Mechaprin. You bring those korbanos, you have kapara. As Rashi says, a fellow's not going to bring a korban unless he has a charato, right? Meaning, if I'm Mechal Shabbos, so I'm only going to take the initiative to bring a korban chatas because I feel bad about it, and therefore because I have charata, I what's it called? Not resent it. I feel bad about it. So then regret it. So then, so when I bring the korban, I get kapara, I get atonement. Misav Yom Kippur mechaprim imat shuve. So death as well as Yom Kippur are both mechaper if you do tshuva. The Gemara is going to go into more detail about these things. Tshuva mechaperes al averos kalos al esev al osaise. Tshuva, what repentance atones for sort of light averos. And again, the Gemara is going to go into more details. Al esev al osaise, on positive commandments, on negative commandments. Val achmuris hu tole. Now, if it's a more stringent avera, so then tshuva is only going to be able to sort of make it pending, make the atonement pending, until Yom Kippur comes, and then Yom Kippur will sort of finish up the atonement. If a fellow, however, says, I'll just sin and I'll do tshuva, easy enough. No, it doesn't work like that. So then tshuva is not going to work in that case. Tshuva is not a lichatchila. If a fellow says, look, I'll sin, and just Yom Kippur will take care of everything. Doesn't work like that. Yom Kippur could atone for sins between a fellow and the Eibishter. However, if Reuven does something to harm Shimon, does something against Shimon, he can't just pray to God to fix it. Reuven needs to go to Shimon and say, Shimon, I'm asking for mechila. Darish Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah darshan, mikol chatosechem lifnei Hashem titaru. That from all of your sins before God, you will become pure. That sins between man and God, Yom Kippur can atone for those. But sins between Reuven and Shimon, God cannot atone for that. Only Shimon can atone for Reuven's sin in that case, and Reuven would have to ask for mechila. Amar Bakiva, says the holy Rabbi Akiva, Ashreichem Yisrael, happy, fortunate are you, Israel. Lifnei mi atem mitayrin, before whom do you become pure? Umi mitayr eschem, and who purifies you? Avichem shabashamayim, your Father in heaven. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'zorakti aleichem ma'im torah mutayartem, I will throw upon you pure waters and purify you. V'omer mikveh Yisrael Hashem, and it says that the mikveh of Israel is God. Ma mikveh mitayres atmeim, afakodesh baruch hu mitayres Yisrael. Just like a mikveh is mitaher, purifies the impure people, so also the Eibishter purifies the Yidden. Says the Gemara, Asham Vadai in, Asham Tali Lo. In fact, the Gemara, only an Asham Vadai, like an Asham Me'ilos, for example, is going to be Mechaper, but in Asham Talui, this Asham that you bring, sort of like when you're not sure if you have to bring a Korban Chatas or not, in particular cases, so that is not Mechaper. V'kapara Ksivbe, it says Kapara also by an Asham Talui. So Hanach Mechaper Kapara Gemura, Asham Talui, and Mechaper Kapara Gemura. So the Gemara gives two answers. The first answer is that, when you bring a Korban Chatos or an Asham Talui, that's it. You bring the Korban, you get your Kapara, you go on with your life. But an Asham Talui is just that. Talui means sort of pending. An Asham Talui, you bring in the meantime, as Rashi says, so that in the meantime you won't get any Yisurim or anything like that. But once you find out, if you later on find out for sure if you did the Aveira or not, well then, if you did, you have to bring a follow-up Korban Chatas. And therefore, so the Mishnah says that a Chatas and an Asham Vadai are Mechapim because once you bring the Korban, you're done. Whereas an Asham Talui, it's sort of just a pending state. Inami, or else, Hanach or else you could say a different reason, which is that the Chatas and the Asham Vade are not covered by another Korban, whereas the Asham Talui is. What does that mean? The Tanan is or not necessarily a Korban, but let's go weiter for a second. The Tanan is we learn in the Mishnah, Chai b'chatos v'ashamus v'da'in, she'avar le'en Yom Kippurim chayovin, hashamus tluim p'turin. That if a fellow needs to bring a Korban Chatos or an Asham Vadai, and he doesn't yet bring it, and then it was Yom Kippur, well, even after Yom Kippur, you're still going to have to offer the Korban Chatas or the Asham Vadai. However, if a fellow needed to bring an Asham Talui, and he didn't yet bring it, and then it was Yom Kippur is going to, do whatever atonement needed to be accomplished by the Asham Talui, and you don't have to bring an Asham Talui anymore. And therefore, since the Chatas and the Asham Vadai are, something else is not able to cover their atonement, i.e. Yom Kippur passing by is not able to make you pater for it. So we say that right there, mechaper. Whereas an Asham Talui, which can be essentially covered by other things, so it alone is not mechaper. It does not atone. Okay? Fine. Misav Yom Kippurim, mechaper and Teshuva. So the Mishnah said that death and Yom Kippur could be mechaper if you did tshuva. Ima tshuva in b'fnei atzman lo. So are we saying that Misa and Yom Kippur are only mechaper if you did tshuva, but if you didn't do tshuva, if you only had Yom Kippur, for example, then you wouldn't get tshuva, then you wouldn't get atonement? Meaning, Yom Kippur alone is not enough to get atonement. You also have to do tshuva. But Nema Deloku Rebbe, let's say that this is not like Rebbe. The Tanya is, we learn in the Brisa Rebbe, Omer says Rebbe, Al kol averis shebatorah, all of the averis in the Torah, bin asa tshuva, bin lo asa tshuva, whether you did tshuva, repentance, whether you didn't, Yom Kippur mechaper. Yom Kippur atones. So you don't need to do tshuva in order for Yom Kippur to work. Yom Kippur works even without tshuva. Chutz mi porek ol. Porek ol is in parentheses. We usually don't read parentheses, but Rashi seems to have this girsa. So, to the exception of somebody who is he's kofar, he denies God, and he's not interested in the Eibishter. Umgalaponim b'Torah, somebody who sort of desecrates the Torah and makes light of it and doesn't treat it properly. Umefer bris basar, somebody who somehow his mefer is bris milah. Okay. Shem also tshuva Yom Kippur mechaper, v'mlo also tshuva and Yom Kippur mechaper. That if he does that, he needs to do tshuva in those cases. If he does tshuva in those cases, so then says Rebbe, then he gets kapar. But if he doesn't do tshuva, Yom Kippur it will not be memele mechaper for those things. However, in general, other than these three things, if a fellow sins, and even if he doesn't do tshuva, Yom Kippur is going to be mechaper memele. So our Mishnah says that Yom Kippur is only mechaper if you did tshuva, but Rebbe says you don't have to do tshuva. Yom Kippur is mechaper memele. So afilutema Rebbe tshuva baya Yom Kippur lo baya tshuva. Well, interesting answer. You can say that according to Rebbe. If you have Yom Kippur, so Yom Kippur is mechaper even if you didn't do tshuva. But if you do tshuva, you're still going to need Yom Kippur. All right. So do you need to do tshuva then at all? Like, what's the point of tshuva? Maybe you do tshuva if I don't know. What's the point of doing tshuva if you don't really need it? Meaning Yom Kippur memele is mechaper. Even if you do tshuva, you still need Yom Kippur. Maybe it helps somewhat in the meantime. Maybe it helps with the Yisurin or something in the meantime, kind of like an Oshim Tali. I don't know. Chevre, that was daf 85 in Masechta Yoma. That was like a complicated daf. It was it seems like it was a long daf. Anyways, what did we discuss? We discussed the beginning of the daf, Pikuach nefesh dochech shabbis, right? That Shmuel says that when it comes to Pikuach nefesh, we don't go after the majority. That, even if the majority is kusim, and we might assume that this person is a kusi, maybe we shouldn't be Michal Shabbos. No, even in that case, we are Michal Shabbos, in order to save the fellow. And we said that there are, situations where we go after the rov based on the kusim or the Yisrael or mechza al mechza. And we said that if the majority is kusim, so if we're going to say if you find a baby somewhere and we don't know if it's a yid or a kusi, so say if the majority are kusim, we treat the baby as a kusi, and that if we're going to be sustaining this baby, we could feed him nevelis. And if the majority is yidden, so then we could treat him as a yid in terms of ashavas aveda, that if somebody has a lost object, we return it to this person. And then there was an interesting thing about what if it's 50-50, 50% kusi, 50% Yisrael. So we treat him as Yisrael. We said to the extent that if this suffix baby, if he grows up and has an ox, and then it gores the ox of a yid, so then the yid is going to try to extract nezek shalim from him. We could say, no, I'm only paying chatzi nezek. If you want nezek shalim, prove that I'm not Jewish. But otherwise, we can assume that he's Jewish and he only pays chatzi nezek. We said that if there's a building that falls down, you could be Michal Shabbos to save the fellow, even if we don't know if there's a fellow there bichlal, or even if he is, we don't know if he's alive or not, or we don't know if he's a yid or not. Nonetheless, in all these cases, you could be, Michal Shabbos to hopefully save this person. Then we discussed the source of Pikuach Nefesh being dochech Shabbos, which is very interesting. We had all sorts of opinions. The opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, who says it comes from Ababa Machteres. We had the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who comes from the Kohanim and doing the Avodah Beis Hamidrash, Mizbechi Tikachenu Lamus. We had the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who says, from the fact that Bris Milah is dochech Shabbos, which is only one limb of a fellow, so certainly saving the entire fellow is going to be dochech Shabbos. We saw, right, Chal Shabbos Achas Kadesh Yishmor Shabbos Os Harbe. We saw a few different opinions, and then there was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, says V'chai Bohem. The Apostle says you should live by the mitzvahs, and therefore it wouldn't make any sense if you can end up dying because of the mitzvahs. So therefore you can be Michal Shabbos to save a fellow. We then moved on to a new Mishnah which started discussing tshuva, which is very interesting, right? Is Yom Kippur alone mechaper? Like Rebbe says, do you maybe need tshuva along with Yom Kippur? Very interesting discussions which we will continue with tomorrow. Chevre, I hope you enjoyed Daf Peh of Masechta Yoma. Enjoy your day. Cheers.